Hey friend, and welcome to another episode of Negligence, the Dylan-Redwine story. Before we get too far, I have a few announcements to make. I need to give a huge thank you to CS for your recent Patreon subscription. Thank you so much. Your support means everything to me. Again, if you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/trueconsequences or ko-fi.com/trueconsequences. I also have included a PayPal link in my link tree, which is in the show notes below. And finally, I need to thank my team who's helping me to produce this, my co-producer Jackie Moranty, researcher and writer, as well as my researcher JT Hosak. Thank you so much for your help. I couldn't do this show without you. You all make this possible. On the most recent episode of Negligence, we heard about the last time Dylan was heard from, and we learned about the fact that he went missing. Today, we are going to discuss more of the circumstances leading up to Dylan's disappearance and how his family responded. But before we get into all of that, I want to take some time and focus on Dylan. If you have been listening to this show long enough, you know that I care deeply about the victims and try my very best to be victim-focused in my coverage. My name is Eric Carter-Landin, and this is part 2 of The Absence, Negligence, the Dylan-Redwine story. Dylan was born on February 6, 1999 in Denver, Colorado. By all accounts, he was a funny, friendly, and loving young man. His parents moved him and his older brother to the Durango Bayfield area when Dylan was about 5 years old. He grew up in the Bayfield area and remained there until he was about 12 years old. Then his mom was awarded primary custody and was allowed to move Dylan permanently to Monument. I want you to hear from the people closest to Dylan as they describe who he was and what they remembered about him.
Please state your full name, spelling your last name so the court reporter can fill in the record.
Yes, sir. Ryan Lee Nava, Nava.
When did you first meet Dylan Redwine?
It was the summer of 2011. Let's say July. It was July of 2011.
Can you please tell us how you met Dylan?
Yeah, I went to the Family Dollar in Bayfield with my grandma, and I saw a bunch of kids about my age, and I was new to town. So I think Dylan noticed me, so he came over to me and asked if I wanted to hang out. So that afternoon, I went to Wesley Rayburn's, and since then, I was his friend.
Say, since then you were his friend. Which person you were friends?
Dylan Redwine.
How would you describe Dylan?
I would describe Dylan as a good friend, outgoing, funny. To us, he was a prankster a little bit. We all like to play jokes on each other. So, a funny guy, good guy, outgoing.
And how close did the two of you become over time?
We became pretty close. I would say definitely a best friend.
Can you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record? And the reason I ask you to do that is the court reporter has to type down everything we say, including the spelling of your last name.
Sure. My name is Amanda Nadine Saxton, Saxton.
Who were some of your closest friends during that time period?
So my closest friends, I had a friend named Kayla in Durango, and I had a friend named Alex in Durango, and then Dylan was a close friend of mine, but we only kept tabs over the phone.
We'll talk about that, okay? How did you first meet Dylan?
When I moved to Bayfield in 4th grade, he was one of my first friends in Bayfield.
How'd you guys meet?
In school.
And what grade was that? Sorry, you said?
4th.
Where was Dylan living at the time?
I believe he was living in Forest Lake in Bayfield.
How would you describe Dylan?
He was a pretty fiery kid. He had a little bit of a temper. He was loud, and he was pretty, at least with me, he was loud. He was just an overall pretty fun, rowdy, short-tempered kid.
Okay. Fun, rowdy, feisty.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like the ingredients for a 13-year-old boy. The kind of kid who would stand up for himself and loved ones?
Yeah, I think so.
Please state your full name, spelling your last name for the record.
Joseph Anthony, Ceballos.
How would you describe Dylan as a person?
Very outgoing, very funny, humble, smart.
Please state your full name, spelling your last name for the record.
Kristen, Kristen, Baird, Baird.
I'd like you to describe for the jury, what was Dylan like as a person?
He was amazing. Like, he always had a smile on his face. He, if you were upset, he would brighten your day. Right now, I know he'd be telling me he's proud that I'm here, and, you know, he's just he was the happiest person ever.
You mentioned Dylan. Can you tell the jury who Dylan is in relation to?
Dylan was my youngest son. He was 13.
How many kids have you had? That's all.
I have 2 boys.
What's your other boy's name?
Cory.
Was Cory born?
Cory was born in November of 91. In February of 99.
Where were they each born?
Cory was born in Denver, Colorado, and Dylan was born in Denver, Colorado.
Where were you living at the time of Dylan's birth?
In Denver, Colorado.
Spend a couple minutes telling the jury about Dylan, okay?
You heard a lot yesterday from all of his friends, and it's all true. Dylan was sweet. He was funny. He was charismatic. He was very empathetic. He really cared about people and their feelings. Very sweet boy. He loved video games, of course. He loved sports, baseball, football, any kind of sport. He was very enthusiastic about anything he tried to do. When he played baseball, the coach had to tell me that Dylan had to play his spot because he played the entire field. So he was on it.
Now, there was a common thread among the friends and family of Dylan, and that fact was that everyone shared the opinion that Dylan did not want to go visit his dad for Thanksgiving. It was enough that his grandmother was terminally ill, but if you couple that with the strain that was already happening between Mark and Dylan, it makes sense that he wouldn't want to go there. Let's hear from his friends and family about this.
Were you living in Colorado Springs in 2012?
Yes.
You have a boyfriend at that time?
Technically.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Dylan was my boyfriend.
Now, when you say technically, is that because the two of you were so young?
We were, he had moved, so we were deciding since he had moved whether or not we should stay together.
So you're getting upset, and as the court said, if you need a break, you let us know, okay? There's water there for you as well. And then there's tissues to your left, okay? How did you first meet Dylan?
He lived across the street from me.
What neighborhood?
Like mad, like,
What's your address? Just the area of Colorado Springs.
like North Carefree.
You mentioned he was moving. Where was he moving to?
Monument.
Monument's located close to Colorado Springs,
Yes.
but not right in the same town.
No.
Who was Dylan living with at the time?
His mom.
How did you first meet Dylan?
We were all actually outside, and he was with my other best friends, Adam and Joe. And I walked up to them because I didn't know who Dylan was. And we all just they introduced me to Dylan, and we all were super close then because Adam and me were already close, me and Joe were already close, and then Dylan fit right in.
How often would you hang out with Dylan?
Every day.
Were you going to the same school as him at that point?
No.
Where did you go to school?
Russell Middle School.
Where did Dylan go to school?
I believe Monument. I didn't know the actual school.
Had he ever talked about running away or hurting himself?
No.
And how often would the two of you talk?
Every day.
And how would that happen? Was that in person, text? How did it?
Both.
And when you would text Dylan, how quickly would he respond usually?
Quickly.
What was his relationship like with his mother, to your knowledge?
They were very close. He loved his mom more than anything.
When was the last time you saw Dylan, Ms. Barrett?
The last day he left.
Where was he leaving for?
Here.
Durango area?
And I know you're upset, but can we have that a yes or a no, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Court reporter, I know that I could tell this is really hard. The court reporter types down everything that you and I say so that we have a record. Okay? So I'd like to talk to you about the last time you saw Dylan. Okay? Where was that?
My house.
How'd that come about? Can you tell the jury?
He was leaving, so he wanted to say goodbye to me before he came down. And it wasn't really a great conversation.
Can I stop you there for a second? Okay. Where had Dylan been the night before?
I believe he stayed the night at Adam's.
And who had he spent the night with?
Adam.
Anyone else?
Maybe Joe.
And what'd you guys do during that day?
So we were all, we actually came to my house. We were just all saying goodbye. We hung out, took some pictures, just talked about like what was gonna be going on and when he'd be back.
Where was Dylan going?
Here, Durango.
For what?
See his father.
For what reason?
Technically, the court told him he had to go.
Is that a conversation you had with Dylan that day?
Yes.
You mentioned that he was going to be leaving. Where was his mom going to be picking him up that day?
My house.
Did his mom come and pick him up eventually?
Yeah, because they used to live on my street, so she picked him up like right at the end of the driveway.
Did that?
Yeah, so I ran down crying, saying bye.
How much time did you spend together that day?
It wasn't a long time because he had to make the plane.
You mentioned taking some photos. Who were those photos of, Ms. Barrett?
So we all took photos together. But the main photos that I have is Dylan with Adam and Joe on each side on my couch.
Were you aware that Dylan had lived in the Bayfield, Durango area previously?
Yes.
You're a smart person, so you're able to guess that. You see where my questions are going, but for the court reporter, she always wants me to finish before you go, okay?
Yeah.
That's why she just gave me that look.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. She gave me the look because she knows I'm the one I'm supposed to know. It's not your fault. Okay. So now he's going to be flying out that day back to the Durango area. I believe you said to visit his father because of the court order.
Yes.
How did Dylan seem about visiting his friends in this area?
That's all he cared about.
What do you mean?
That's the only reason he wanted to come to Durango.
Was it your impression Dylan did not want to visit his father
No.
at that time?
Sorry. No.
Let's clarify that. No meaning no, that wasn't your impression, or no, he didn't want to come.
He did not want to see his father.
Thank you.
You and the others urged him to stay in the Springs? Or talk to him about why he had to go?
Yes.
And what was the reason he had to go?
He was mandated by the court order to come see his dad.
What was his mood and demeanor before leaving for the airport on that day?
He was not excited. He was excited to see his friends. He didn't really bring up much of his dad because he was not really looking forward to it.
Do you remember him leaving?
Yes.
What do you remember?
I remember him saying he was leaving to me. He walked outside my door. And then for some reason I started running after him because I was like, this is...
What was your emotional state at that?
I didn't want him to go.
When did you find out Dylan was missing?
Less than 24 hours.
How'd you find out, Barry?
So Adam and Joe called me right after school, and they're like, Kristen, you really need to come over. And then I came over, and instantly they told me that he was gone, like missing.
And what was it like over the days and weeks that followed you?
Very hard.
After the custody hearing ended, who got custody?
My mom.
Okay. Had you talked about Dylan, let me ask this. Had you talked to Dylan about his relationship with his father at this juncture?
Yes.
Had you talked to Dylan about whether he wanted to go see his father?
Yes.
Had you talked to Dylan about whether he wanted to talk to his father?
Yes.
What was your understanding of communication based on those conversations with Dylan, the communication between Dylan and the defendant?
He did not want to communicate.
And was there discussions in your house that you heard with regard to whether he was communicating enough with the defendant?
Sorry, can you ask the question again?
Yes. Do you ever hear your mother tell him that he should call his father, for example?
Yes.
And how did Dylan respond to the request to communicate with his father?
Dylan always said he can call me too.
So the Thanksgiving trip, I want to talk about this. Let me skip ahead to November of 2012. What was the last communication that you ever received from your brother electronically?
It was a happy birthday text that he had sent me.
What day is your birthday?
November 14th.
Do you ever get any other phone calls or emails or text messages or anything from your brother after that?
No.
Did you have a conversation with him where you saw him in person before he left?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury, where was that conversation?
It was in his bedroom at my mother's house.
Can you explain that conversation prior to his trip to the jury, please?
Yes. We had just gotten back from a concert that for my birthday, and I dropped my mom off, and I went and talked to my brother while I was at my mom's house, and I knew he was getting ready to leave that day, so I went and gave him a hug and just kind of talked to him about his trip, if he was going to see his friends, and just kind of seeing how he was feeling about it.
How was he feeling about it?
He was pretty anxious. He didn't really want to go, and so I kind of, joked with him a little bit about, him leaving.
How did you joke with him?
I knew he wasn't very enthused to go, so I just made the comment, don't have too much fun. And he kind of, rolled his eyes at me.
Were you teasing him basically about going?
Yes.
What about whether his bag was packed or not? Did you note something about that as you had the conversation?
I don't recall.
Was he prepared to go?
Yes.
Did you talk to him about whether he was eager to see his friend?
Yes.
Was he?
Yes.
Did you talk to him about whether he wanted to see his father or not?
Briefly, he kind of just indicated to me that he wasn't, that's the part of the trip he wasn't excited for.
And then I want to ask you a separate question. In having that interaction with him in his room, did you see any injuries on him, any lip sores or any cuts or anything like that before he left?
No.
The jury is hearing evidence about an incident that took place in 2012. So I'm going to ask you some questions about November of 2012.
Okay.
Who were your close friends at that point in your life?
Dylan, Adam, Kristen.
How did you first meet Dylan?
Me and Adam were playing football, and we just saw he was, active and playing. I think he was playing basketball or something, and we invited him to play. We played that one day, and then we just started becoming best friends and playing.
As best friends, how often would you hang out together?
Me and Adam, we would hang out almost every day.
How about you and Dylan?
Every day, pretty much, when he was available.
What about school? Did you guys go to the same school?
No.
What school were you going to at the time?
Jenkins Middle School.
You recall what school Dylan was going to at the time?
I can't answer that.
Where was he living?
With his mom, across the street from Adam.
Across the street from
Yeah.
Adam. Had he ever talked about running away or hurting himself?
Never.
And how often would the two of you communicate by cell phone or text?
A lot.
Generally speaking, when Dylan would text you and you would text him back, how quick was he to respond?
Very frequent, like that.
So for the record, you've snapped your fingers.
Yes.
What was Dylan's relationship like with his mother?
Awesome. Actually, it's inspired me because I don't really have a mother. So
Sorry to hear that. When you say inspired you, what do you mean by that?
I wish I would have had a connection like that with my mother.
Do you recall the last time you saw Dylan being around November 17th, 18th of 2012?
I really don't remember the days, to be honest.
Okay, that's okay. Do you remember the last time you saw him?
Yes.
Remember the day before that as well?
A little bit, yes.
So I have a number of questions to ask you. Before I start asking these questions, why don't you, in your own words, tell the jury what you remember about your final time with Dylan?
Like the day of. So what I remember is Dylan spending the night with, me, Adam, and us chilling, and then we got a knock on the door. His mom came, and then she came and got him, and that's pretty much what my memory remembers.
Where was he going to?
I think he was going to his dad's.
Do you have the impression that he wanted to or did not want to go visit his father?
He absolutely did not want to go with his father.
And that's based on conversations that you had with Dylan?
Absolutely.
What was his mood and demeanor before leaving for the airport?
He really didn't want to go. I could see fear and sadness in his eyes.
Do you remember his mom picking him up from the trip to the airport?
Like at my house? Yes.
Can you describe that for us, please?
It was pretty quick. It was just, I said, bye, I'll see you whenever. I gave him a hug, and then she was like, we got to go, and then they left, and pretty much that's what happened.
You indicated with your arms it looked like a hugging motion?
Yeah, I hugged him.
Remember doing that?
Yes.
Ever see Dylan again after that?
No.
What further communication did you have with him after he left with his mom to the airport?
I texted him. He sent me a picture, and that was it.
What was the picture of?
The plane.
Do you recall what he said in the text?
I do not.
So he sent you a picture of what?
The plane.
And then what words did he send you accompanying the picture of the plane?
What now?
What now? Did you ever hear from Dylan again after that?
No.
When did you find out that Dylan was missing?
November 19th.
How'd you find out, Mr. Spiles?
The news.
What was the impact on you?
I broke down that moment.
Tell the jury what you mean by that, please.
I was in tears. I had a sick feeling in my stomach, and I just completely broke down.
And the days and weeks that followed, what was that like?
Just sadness, pain. I can never imagine that. Never.
Now that you've heard all of this, I want you to listen to Cory talk about what happened the day that Dylan went missing.
Mr. Redwine, how did you hear that your brother was missing?
My mother called me while I was at work and said that Dylan is missing. We can't find him, and that's how she told me.
What was your reaction to that?
At first, I didn't really believe her. It kind of had to sink in for a few minutes. I thought, maybe something else is up. But then she seemed pretty adamant about it. So then, once she kind of, showed her worry, then I started to worry as well.
As time passed, did you become even more concerned?
Yes.
Did you try to communicate with him?
Yes.
How did you do that?
I sent him several text messages, and called him, countless times on the drive down.
Did he ever answer you back?
No.
And so what did you do that evening?
We got into town, and we spoke with the marshal's office.
Let me back you up for a second. You said you were at work. Where were you at work when you heard?
I was at my office, which is in Colorado Springs. I was just getting ready to end the day. So my mom called me about 4 o'clock, and I usually leave by 4:30. So she called me. I asked my boss if I could take the next few days off due to my brother. So I left work and just packed an overnight bag. My mom was there waiting for me. So I got my overnight bag, and we just left straight from my apartment down to Durango.
Okay. And you drove?
I was passenger. My stepdad, Mike, was driving.
Mike Hall?
Yes.
And who else went with you in the car?
My mother.
When you arrived, where did you go?
To the Bayfield Marshal's office.
Was the defendant at the Bayfield Marshal's office at that time?
No.
What did you do when you arrived at the Bayfield Marshal's office?
We spoke with the marshal, and he gave us just a brief rundown of kind of what was going on, what their plans were, and kind of, seeing how we could find a plan to find Dylan.
By the time that you got to Bayfield, were you concerned?
Yes.
Was that at night?
Yes.
Do you remember, I don't need a time, but roughly, was that late?
Yeah, it was, anywhere between 10 and 11 pulling in.
What was that night like for you with your brother missing?
Not a good feeling. I just have no clue, and the only thing you want to do is find him. So that's kind of what our focus was. We just wanted to come down and do anything we could to find him. So we just stayed strong as a family, and that was our task.
Were you receiving updates at the time that you arrived and then throughout the night?
Yes. When we spoke with the sheriff the night we arrived, they said meet with us first thing in the morning, and we'll kind of let you know what our plan is. So after we arrived, first thing in the morning we did was start going back to where we left off that night.
And where did you stay? Do you recall?
We stayed at a friend's house, Amber Harrison. We stayed at her house.
Was she also your mother's attorney in the divorce and custody case?
Yes.
And was she also, as well, a family friend?
Yes.
So she allowed you all to stay there because you were there to look for Dylan?
Yes.
Did you get a lot of sleep that night?
No.
And finally, let's listen to Elaine describe her interaction with Mark after he told her Dylan was gone.
And what does that text message from the defendant tell you?
Elaine, I'm wondering if you have heard from Dylan. I've been trying to reach him all afternoon.
Ms. Hall, what do you say in response at 4:37 p.m.?
It's really worrying when I'm 7 hours away and get a message like this from you. I haven't heard from Dylan today. Where did you leave him or last see him?
Defendant responds at 4:39 p.m. and says what, Ms. Hall?
I went to town for errands and he was fine. I am just concerned and thought you may have heard from him.
How do you respond to that text at 4:42 p.m.?
Was he at the Viacito house? I'm concerned as well as Will. Please let me know when you find him.
How does the defendant respond at 4:44 p.m.?
Yes, at the lake, and I will.
What do you say at 4:47 in that text message to the defendant?
It's weird that he would just up and leave. Does he have his phone?
The defendant responds at 4:50 p.m. And what does he say to you at that point?
I agree, which is why I'm asking if you have heard from him. I assume he does. and why I have sent him texts and calls. What I don't know is if he has a charger or if it's charged.
And that message was sent at 4:50 p.m.
Yes.
And you were aware that Dylan had his chargers with him.
Yes.
And you send a message at 4:51 p.m. on November 19th. And what do you say?
I am terribly freaked out that he's roaming around in the dark. I think we should call the police.
How does the defendant respond at 4:55?
I didn't want to freak you out, as I'm sure he's fine, but don't think I am not concerned. I just left the Bayfield Marshal's office and headed back to the house. Did you get into a fight with him or something?
And at 4:57, you send another text saying what?
How long has he been missing?
What does the defendant say at 4:57 on November 19th?
No, we talked and everything is fine.
And at 4:58?
Several hours.
And that looks like it's in response to how long has he been missing?
Yes.
What do you say at 4:58 p.m.?
Well, it's not fine. He's missing.
And at 5:40 p.m., so this is about 42 minutes later, you text the defendant, and what do you say?
Have you heard anything from Dylan? You said you called the marshal's office. They have no record of you calling them. I called them.
What do you mean by that?
Just that when I called the marshal's office, they didn't have a report or anything on Dylan being missing, or they really didn't know anything.
What prompted you to call law enforcement?
Because Mark couldn't find Dylan, and I needed some help.
In addition to calling the marshal's office, what other steps did you take to contact law enforcement?
I can't recall specifically. I mean, we were driving at the time. I know I made a number of calls to the marshal's office. And then when we got into town, we went directly to the marshal's office.
You mentioned that you yourself called the police, called the marshal's office, and that's what prompted that text that you sent to the defendant that you just read.
Yes.
What is Exhibit 4 there?
It says call to dispatch, and then it's got 31020 and my initials.
And on March 10th of 2020, those initials signify that you listened to that and verified it was a recording of the same call.
Yes.
And did that recording fairly accurately, in effect, exactly capture the call that you made back on November 19th, 2012?
Honestly, I don't remember specifically what the call, but I'm sure that if I initialed it, then I heard it. And yes.
Sorry, gosh, I got moved again. Hi, my name is dylan-redwine, and my son Dylan-Redwine was visiting his dad up in Durango. I live in Colorado Springs. And his dad texted me a little while ago and said he could not find Dylan. Okay, he's 13 years old. Okay, do you know the address of the dad? 2343 County Road 500 is up in Vicito. Okay. So 2343 County Road 500 is Vicito. Yes, and his dad said he called the marshal's office. I don't know if that's true or not. Let me see here. Let me see if this has been taken yet. He didn't. Okay. We don't have a record of it. What is your name? I'm sorry? What's your last name? Redwine. Redwine. And your first name again? Elaine. Elaine. And your phone number? 433. Yeah. Okay. And his name is Dylan-Redwine? My son's name is Dylan-Redwine, yeah. Okay. His father's name is Mark Redwine. And how do you spell his first name? Dylan. What's his middle name? Nicholas, Nicholas. Okay. And what's his birthday? 0206-1999. 0206-99? Yes. Okay. Does he have any idea where he may have gone? Not according to him, no. Dylan doesn't have friends with him by Peter. We've got friends in Bayfield. Okay. We're calling when I get home, but And when was the last time you saw him? When you texted me, you said a couple hours ago. So.
Where were you when you made the call to dispatch?
In my car,
Where were you driving?
the Durango. I should say the Bayfield. I mean, I put Durango and Bayfield together all the time, but I was driving to Bayfield.
We're going to go back to Exhibit 6 on the screen. You had texted the defendant at 5:40 p.m. If you heard anything from Dylan, you said you called the marshal's office. They have no record of you calling them. I called them. Is that the call that we just listened to?
Yes.
So on the bottom right of the screen there, it says 18:23, November 19th. You sent a text to the defendant. What does that text say?
Have you heard from him?
29, the defendant responds. What does the defendant say?
No, and I am extremely concerned at this point. I just left Tristan's house, and he has not seen him. Waiting for the sheriff to call back. I am doing all.
Okay, we'll scroll down in a minute, but who, to your knowledge, was Tristan?
Tristan was a classmate of Dylan's that lived up in Bicito.
So this text message indicates from the defendant, I just left Tristan's house, and he has not.
Yes.
6:29, the text continues.
And he says, I can and will let you know the moment I hear from him.
What do you say in response, 6:35 now?
He wouldn't just leave, he would have called me. I am so suspect of you right now. How could he just disappear?
And what do you mean when you say he wouldn't just leave, he would have called?
Just as it says, he was very good about letting me know what he was doing, either by calling me or by text. And there were numerous occasions where, he was up in Bicito and, would call or text me, to come get him. So I didn't think this was any different this trip or this time.
So it's suspect to you that he's now gone missing and you haven't heard.
Yes.
What does the defendant say in response at 5:44?
It's just like you to blame me. Right now, the best thing for him is finding him.
The defendant sends another text to you at 7:08. This is about 25 minutes later. What does he say in that text message?
I just spoke with the deputy. His fishing pole is missing, and the deputy is on his way up. He asked that I search the property, which I will do now. I know.
It goes on to say what?
This is difficult, but we got to believe he is okay.
And then you send a text at 8:44 that evening. And at this point, you still haven't heard from, and no one has seen Dylan, right?
Correct.
So what do you say at 8:44 p.m.?
Obviously, I had some typos, but I said, when was the last time you talked to him?
What does the defendant say in response at 8:46 p.m.?
This morning.
8:48 p.m., you send another text to the defendant saying what, Ms. Hall?
Are you looking for him? What are you doing to find him? You seem so nonchalant that our kid is missing.
And then at 9:02 p.m. that same night, November 19th, what do you text to the defendant?
You talked to him on his cell this morning or when you left the house? Did you talk to him at all today on his cell phone?
What does the defendant say at 9:05 p.m.?
I personally spoke with this morning. The sheriff is here now. I'm doing all that I can.
I personally spoke with this morning. Looks like he's missing a him there.
Yes.
The sheriff is here now. I'm doing all that I can. I'm doing all that I can. So 9:05 p.m. he sends the text saying what?
They're here and have advised me you are on your way. There are canine units on the way. And following up on a friend I am not familiar with.
And that's at 9:43 p.m. 10:51 p.m. you send a response to the defendant. What do you say in that text message, Ms. Hall?
Any news? What's this friend's name?
Were you calling anyone from the car and during the course of the evening?
Yes.
Who else were you making calls to?
I was making calls to people that I've known, friends in Durango, because I had to figure out where we were going to stay.
And during that evening and through the night, did you try calling Dylan?
Yes, incessantly. I called him many, many times.
What would happen when you would call Dylan?
It would go to voicemail.
The voicemails for him?
Yes.
You ever connect with him?
No.
How about individuals from the sheriff's office? Did you continue to call them throughout the night too?
I believe so. You know, that was kind of a chaotic night. It's looking back, it's so surreal, but I believe I did call the sheriff's office while we were driving.
And what time approximately did you arrive in the Bayfield, Durango area in this hall?
Oh, it was late. It was maybe 2:30 in the morning, I think.
Where'd you go when you arrived?
Straight to the marshal's office.
And that's it for part 2 of The Absence. We will pick up next week at the same time and discuss the search for Dylan. Thanks for listening and watching. Stay safe, New Mexico. Next time on Negligence.
Another ground search is in the works to find missing Colorado teenager dylan-redwine, but this time organizers are looking for experienced hikers.
Okay. I understand from Jim Byrne that you had called him up and you were interested in talking about putting together a search.
Well, I'm not satisfied that the sheriff's department and the people involved have done enough.
The family of missing teen Dylan-Redwine has been praying for a miracle. The teen vanished while visiting his dad in southwest Colorado for Thanksgiving.